I thought I had imposter syndrome as well. When I would go on to panels and conferences and people would ask me, Nozipho, what are your practical tips for dealing with imposter syndrome? I was one of the people reeling off the tips. And this is the thing that imposter syndrome really frustrates me about. Sometimes it masks the structural issues of what's happening in the environment. What should we be changing in the structures, the processes in that particular environment? And it individualizes the problem.
And I sometimes think the labels that we give and that we put on women and youth hold us back because we end up assuming those positions that we've been given. We end up assuming those labels that have been like put on us. One thing that I'm getting from this conversation is it's how you choose to respond that makes the biggest difference. And I think for a lot of young people, it's how you choose to respond to the fact that there's not always going to be seats for you at the table, unfortunately. Welcome to Mindful Mondays, your weekly dose of conversations, mindful conversations around conscious leadership, storytelling, purpose, and service. And today I'm joined by someone I absolutely love. I've been following her work for so many years, and she calls herself the conversation strategist. I'm talking about Nozipho Tshabalala, and I'm so excited to have her because her work shapes a lot that happens in our society. I remember when I was in high school, my teacher said, the people who can turn complex ideas into simple ones are the ones who are masters, truly masters at what they do. Intelligence is not formed by how big the concepts are and how you explain them at that level that the person at the bottom cannot understand. But it's about people understanding that if you can turn complex ideas and make them clear enough for anyone to understand, that's when you're truly a master at what you do. And Nozipho, you are exactly that.
What a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I've been following your work for a long time. I can even say that I am truly inspired by the work that you do.
Thank you.
And how I think for the longest time, I've now gotten to a place where I understand the power of the voice and how it can shape us as people, the conversations we have with ourselves and with other people. And what you've managed to do is so incredible, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get into it.
So before we start, how are you right now today?
I was just reflecting on that question. I'm actually feeling quite energized but challenged in an interesting way. I've just come from an engagement where the brief was, can you be your youngest self possible? I was like, guys, I'm old. And I had to really think about what would 17-year-old me be wanting to hear from me if they were in the room today. So it was a little bit of an uncomfortable space, but it stretched me into another direction. So I'm feeling energized, and I'm feeling stretched, and I'm happy to be in that place of slight discomfort but slight stretch.
I love that. And I'm curious, what would 17-year-old you want to hear from you?
I think a lot of it has been about green lights. You know, Matthew McConaughey writes a beautiful book called Green Lights, and he talks about people whose words and conversations with you are green lights, affirming, saying go, saying try, saying it's not over yet. And I think there were a lot of things that I had to navigate out of. I always say, I don't like parading poverty, but I grew up extremely poor. My mother was a street vendor. My father was worked in shoe factories and later as a security guard. We sold food and alcohol on the side of the street to survive. And to make my way out of that place, the conversation with myself had to be very loud. And that conversation constantly had to be a conversation about, yes, I can, yes, I'm capable. I might not see somebody doing it right now, but I'll be the first, and that's okay. And so what 17-year-old me would have wanted more of is the external conversation to be just as affirming and validating as the internal conversation, because how we move in the world is the net result of how the external conversation and the internal conversation converge. No matter how confident you may be internally, if all the signals externally are, no, you're not good enough, no, you can't, nobody like you has ever done it, it dims and turns down the volume on the internal. And so I always think that part of the fire that has helped me break through has been a strong internal voice, a fairly strong external voice, especially for my family. But imagine if that had been louder.
Oof.
Imagine if.
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And I think about, what I reflect on is the fact that we can't change where we come from.
Yeah.
We can definitely change where we're going, so it's not the same as where we come from.
Sure.
I've also understood that the efforts of those that came before us, even if they didn't have a lot, because a lot of us have similar backgrounds.
Sure.
You've never seen this before. I was actually reflecting on the fact that my grandfather was a gardener,
Yeah.
and my grandmother was a domestic worker, and they had to put their children through school. They couldn't read or write, but they understood the importance of education. Who was having those conversations with them?
Yeah.
And you said something about the internal dialogue having to converge with the external dialogue, where a lot of us wish we had people to encourage us that say, yeah, you can do it.
Exactly.
You wish you had like a Serena and Venus Williams dad
Yeah.
who believes in you so much that his point is for you to thrive and not to survive. But the beauty of it is that we can have the conversations now.
Yeah.
And that's how we begin to make the change. But a lot of us don't know about the internal conversations. We constantly wait for outside validation.
Yeah.
How did you know that dialogue in general,
Yeah.
is a tool to societal transformation, the transformation of you and the society around you and how it relates to you?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and perhaps I'll answer it in two ways. The first is that I didn't know growing up that, I'm listening to my internal voice. I think in hindsight, I've realized that, but I think my internal voice was so reinforced, especially by my parents, that I began to trust it more. And I love telling this story. I remember going home and saying to my mom, like, I'm an Agnes Pongo. I've got such a big forehead. Everybody's teasing me that I have a big forehead. And my mom said, oh, you've got a big forehead? Oh, the TV's got a big forehead. Remember the olden days TV? She says, the TV's got a big forehead. The computer's got a big forehead. Actually, all the clever things in this house have a big forehead. So do you understand that realization that in everything, even the things that I think are lacks, were celebrated and reinforced positively. And what that did, it just helped me trust because I knew I was smart. My teachers were telling me, but now I was being teased about this forehead. And suddenly that internal voice grew louder and grew bolder. So in hindsight, I think a lot of how I was conditioned and socialized as a young child really helped me to trust the internal voice. And I think as I've grown up now, like in these later years, I've really just come to a place of leaning on just what have I done and achieved, and allowing myself, when I have moments of doubt, to look back at that and say, actually, I might have a doubtful moment right now, but I'm capable of that. And so I'm capable of that too. And so my internal voice is able to separate the noise of what other people say and what other people think about me, and bring me to a stillness about what do I think of me and what do I think I need to do. And I'm able to hear that because I just really think that I've been raised to trust that what I hear from myself is actually as important, if not more important, than what other people are saying.
Oh, wow. I really love that. I really love that, because it takes a while for us to trust our internal voice.
Yeah.
Like a long time.
Yeah.
It's a process of even recognizing what the voice sounds like. Because a lot of, people say, I can't listen to myself speaking on a voice note, because we never really take time to listen and have conversations with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think of the background that you've had, and like I said, I can relate to that background where sometimes you find yourself now, those affirmations you gave yourself, those conversations you had with yourself where you knew you'd end up on these big stages and you'd have this life, but now you're there, and there's this video that I saw where you're speaking about imposter syndrome. And to be fair, a lot of the imposter syndrome, or the narrative, right? A lot of people that feel that way are people who come from backgrounds where they never thought they'd get there.
Yes.
You dreamed it, you willed it, but now you're there. What do I do now? And what I found interesting about that video is that in as much as it's classified medically as something that does exist, you said that it is an illness that is always associated with women.
Yeah.
Please, can you expand on that, and how did you not have or suffer from that imposter syndrome, irrespective of, I guess, your background dictating that?
Yeah. I think so. I must first give credit where credit is due. Up until maybe 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I think I thought I had imposter syndrome as well. When I would go on to panels and conferences and people would ask me, Nozipho, what are your practical tips for dealing with imposter syndrome? I was one of the people reeling off the tips. And then I saw Reshma Sojan, the founder and CEO of Girl Code, speaking at Smith College at their commemoration speech. And she said, just pause for a moment to think about the timing. Young people would say the timing is sus, right? Because the timing of when we start talking about imposter syndrome, it's on the back of the second feminist wave, and this is now in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. Women are breaking into the workplace in numbers. Women are also in academic institutions, so they are graduating and qualifying and becoming identities that were never associated with women before. And then suddenly, out of industrial psychology in particular, comes this term, which is an interesting use of language, because syndrome is pathologizing something. It's giving us a sickness. You suffer from a syndrome. It's almost something that you can't even be cured of, right? And then suddenly it's said that, when women break into these spaces, the first order of business is having to deal with their imposter syndrome. And she goes on to explain that that's actually such a distraction, because actually feeling uncomfortable, feeling a little bit doubtful, having a confidence wobble when you are in a new environment that is bigger than your last achievement is normal. It doesn't happen to women only. And yet we hardly ever hear men being asked about how they deal with imposter syndrome. And so after watching that, I just came to a realization. I was like, Nozi, just pause. Sometimes we internalize narratives that actually have nothing to do with us. I don't suffer from imposter syndrome. I have confidence wobbles sometimes. And it's expected that I can't be 100% confident in all things at all times, and that's normal. Sometimes I doubt my own capability, especially when I'm confronted with something I've never done before. But that doesn't mean that I have this very unique sickness that's been pathologized just around me and my womanhood. And so once I made that connection for myself, what I want to do is firstly just internalize the experience that I'm going into. How am I feeling? What do I need to really do a good job here? But also, and this is the thing that imposter syndrome really frustrates me about, sometimes it masks the structural issues of what's happening in the environment. What should we be changing in the structures, the processes in that particular environment? And it individualizes the problem. So what tends to happen is then women need to be coached out of imposter syndrome, over-coached, over-mentored, over-sponsored, whereas all we needed to do was fix the environment that creates that feeling of women needing to feel like they're the only ones who are doubtful, the only ones who are not as confident about the role. So my answer now, when people say, how do you cope with imposter syndrome, is I don't, because I don't have it. I am a normal human being that has confidence wobbles every now and then, feels a little shaky about my capability sometimes, and I accept that that is normal, and I then deal with that as a real feeling of what I'm going through, and not a sickness or a label that I'm willing for people to put on me.
I was actually thinking about that as you were speaking. The human condition of having to label everything and name everything, but also forgetting the power of the tongue,
Sure.
In most scriptures, it also speaks about how the tongue has the power to breathe life or like create death.
Yeah.
And as you were speaking, I'm understanding that, yes, it is classified as a sickness. Yes, it's born out of industrial psychology. And yes, men do suffer from it. The difference is in how much life we breathe into it.
Yes.
Where we're not saying that it does not exist, but it's how much life is breathed into it where women are concerned. Where imagine how many panels would be different if you asked men too, because they're just told to get over it. You told me an interesting story the other day where you were speaking about your experience at CNBC and how you were speaking to CEOs and you felt out of your depth and you felt like you're not, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that immediately, that feeling of knowing that you are technically qualified, but you still don't know enough, could be classified as imposter syndrome. But it's how you chose to deal with it that was the difference.
I'm so glad you brought up that story, because I think it's actually the perfect example. So here I am, being headhunted by the biggest financial platform on the continent. And I'm being told that you're going to become one of our anchors. I don't come from a family that is talking about the stock market or trades or reading the Financial Times at dinner. That's just not the background that I come from. And so, yes, I feel intimidated. Yes, I feel like a fraud. I'm like, at some point, these guys are going to realize that girl doesn't know a thing about this. And I remember in the interview saying to the CEO, are you sure that this? And she's like, yes, we are particularly sure about you because we love the fact that you understand the political economy and that you can bring that into the financial conversation. I still didn't believe her. And then I go into the space, and the second thing now happens for me was where I begin to realize that actually there is a gap. And the gap for me is not quite understanding the language of financial markets. And then the third layer of it is that I decide to do something about the gap. So I go back to school and I do a second master's part-time in development finance, and I take on the boogeyman of finance because that's the thing I was afraid of. And I come out of that really confident, being able to interview any CEO around the world and really talk not only just financial markets, but merging that with the political economy. The lesson for me is this. There's a scenario where I could have just been stuck on, oh, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. Oh, they're going to catch me out. Oh, I'm a fraud. Oh, I'm not good enough for this. And stay there, and then maybe go to a conference and ask Shudu, what are your practical tips? And then Shudu says, go to affirmations, and then I go home and I'm doing my affirmations, but nothing changes. Or I can acknowledge that I'm feeling out of my depth. I can acknowledge that actually it's true. I actually don't know a lot about financial markets. And now that I see the gap, I can make the choice to close the gap and to put my effort and exercise my agency in closing the gap. And then I can come out of that, not distracted by the noise of, I don't feel good enough, but empowered by listening to the voice that says, I see what I need to do in order to move to the next level, and just doing that. And again, it would be so amiss for me to sit here and go, I knew that at the time. I didn't. In hindsight, I realized that the way I had responded to the lack of confidence I was feeling was that I didn't allow that response to victimize me, but rather to go, let me own it. There is a gap and I need to close it, and then just close it.
You know what I find interesting about what you just said? It's how we respond to those feelings. I find that a lot of times we get to a place where those feelings are real, when I find myself at school sometimes and I'm like, oh my God, I don't belong here, all these people. Because you look at all the stats that say someone like you shouldn't be there, instead of looking at everything that points to why you should be there, right? I remember this one time I spoke in class and I hadn't really done the readings. I'd done some of them. And I responded without having the full picture. And I was very embarrassed by it. And at first I was like, I just don't belong here. How did I even get accepted? But you know what I did the next time? I went home and did all the readings.
Exactly.
And the next time I spoke, even if the professor didn't agree with me, I could debate with him because I'm coming from a place where, yes, I get that the readings say this. I can actually reference this person and I can reference that, but I still don't agree with you. But you can't just say, no, I don't belong there and not do anything about it, because I think that's the difference between people who choose to victimize themselves and people who choose to rise above that. Will the feeling go away completely? Sometimes it doesn't. Honestly, it really doesn't, which is why I like that story that you have at CNBC, because life is constantly being about being a student and realizing that you're not always going to know everything.
Exactly.
And certain things feel very uncomfortable in the beginning, and that's just how life is. But I think a lot of young people, and I sometimes think the labels that we give and that we put on women and youth hold us back, because we end up assuming those positions that we've been given. We end up assuming those labels that have been put on us, you know, that we don't belong in spaces. And sometimes the environment actually says that you don't belong there, the culture. Because it's one thing to say we're accepting more and more people into the space, but the culture is not really conducive to that change. And I can see how that comes up. But I think one thing that I'm getting from this conversation is it's how you choose to respond that makes the biggest difference. And I think for a lot of young people, it's how you choose to respond to the fact that there's not always going to be seats for you at the table, unfortunately. There are not enough seats. Let's even start there. But how do we create our own seats? How do we create our own industries? Because that's the other thing
Yeah.
about where the world is going. Instead of just saying that I'm not good enough for this and that, I won't even try because I'm not good enough. I just don't belong here. And I find it quite inspiring, especially in the context, again, of the conversations we have with ourselves. The power of the tongue, again, because the conversations you chose to have with yourself are what made you different and made you stand out and
Yeah.
made you pivot from what you're doing to what you're doing now, which is basically shaping key and high stake conversations.
Yeah, and I probably I want to make a statement and then I want to talk about that transition. One of the hardest things I've had to learn as an adult is that my feelings are not facts. Just because I feel a certain way doesn't mean that's true. It's a feeling. It's an emotional response to something. And emotional responses are important because they're cues to our body about our existence in a particular space. But just because I feel like I don't belong here doesn't mean that I don't belong here. That's not a fact. It was been one of the hardest things to separate my feelings from the facts. And it's one of those exercises that I almost do, when I'm feeling a little out of depth, out of it's like, okay, what am I feeling? But the fact is I'm here. I'm the one that has been called for this moment. And so what is it that sits behind the fact? Why me and why nobody else? And that helps me to shift the conversation internally. And so I just wanted to be clear that I'm not saying that there's no space for us to have those conversations of self-doubt and a wobble in conflict. But know that you are in that conversation, you are still dealing with the feelings. And then have the courage to put your feelings aside and deal with the facts. And that distinction is, I think, one of the transitional things you've got to do internally when you're confronted with something new. I can see you want to jump in, so let me let you go, and then I'll talk about my transition later.
No, I'm just curious. It's not a fake it till you make it.
No.
Because you can't fake it for that long.
No.
So how did you get to a point where you could differentiate that my feelings are not facts? These are my feelings, these are the facts. How did you get to that realization? Because what the world teaches us is, if you feel like that, just fake it till you make it.
Or if you feel like that, that is what you are. If you feel excluded, you don't belong. If you feel like you haven't done well, you're a failure. I don't think those things always need to hang together. And I almost can't draw a line in the sand and say, at this point in my life, I started realizing the difference. I think, again, it's just in one of those conversations that are infused in me as a young person growing up, where I was allowed to have space for my feelings. And then the conversation, so what are you going to do about it? I read somewhere many years ago, and I just thought it was hilarious at the time, and I didn't realize how it stuck in my psyche, that everybody is entitled to a pity party. Right? You are 100% entitled to a pity party, but it can't last more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So have your, oh, woe is me, and what's happening to me, and da-da-da-da. Have it, then be done. And I think the number was something like 54 minutes or whatever, but it was quite a distinct thing. And I was like, oh, so there's a point where you lament your situation and you lament what's happened. And then there's a point where you get up and you do something about it. I was raised in a get up and do family. When there was no money on the table, we got up, we made amagwinya in the morning, we fried chicken in the morning, we cooked rice in the morning, we put it out on the vending table, and we did something about it. I actually think I don't know how to stay in the woe is me, because it doesn't make sense to me. I was sharing with you that I've written a book. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But one of the things I talk about is in these pivotal moments in my life, my mom used to always say to me, "Asihlulwa yilutho thina." And one might take that, of course, meaning we are not defeated by anything, as just a pep talk. But actually it became a mantra in my life, is that every time I was confronted by something that I thought was bigger than me, those words would come like almost viscerally could feel them in my body. And I would find a way around, on top, beneath, even if it's the longer route, even if I don't get there when I want to get there. But how and when am I bringing myself to the party? And that for me, I think, has been a big differentiator. So when you talk about transitions, you know, I came into CNBC, like I told you, feeling a little out of depth and so on. I closed the gap that I thought I had. And then by luck, I get invited to moderate something. Somebody says to me, oh, I've seen you on TV. I'd love for you to moderate something. And I'm like, I've never moderated anything. But I'm just like, you know, how different could it be? It's just a live audience. And so I have an experience of being able to take a conversation out of the studio, off the script, off the auto cue, and into the lived experiences of people with the real consequences for the outcomes of it. And you could almost feel the energy pulsating with the people in the audience as you make the connection and you land the questions that they think are going to bring the kind of answers that will be progress to them. I experienced it once and I just knew. I was like, there's no two ways about it. That feeling, I want that. Now, forget the fact that I'd never seen anybody do moderating as a full-time profession. But I knew of people who were moderating and doing. Your Sikkim Kabatelis were moderating at the time. The Larato Mbeles were moderating at the time. Bronwyn Nielsen's were moderating at the time. But I just always was very clear in my heart as well that my gift, whatever it is, will never become a gig. So I don't gig my gift. And what that means for me is that it demanded that I resign from CNBC. So I had this game plan. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to move from where I live so that I have less rent. I'm going to trade in my car so that I don't have that much of a car installment. And I'm going to downgrade my life so that I can do this full time. And completely give my everything and my all, because I was so convinced about the power of conversation when it is consequential and the extent to which it can really help us bring about the kind of societies that we're talking about. So the transition was about listening to my voice and my gut first. It was also about taking a bet on myself, because there was nowhere else to hide. I was letting go of the big brand of CNBC Africa that had been backing me and saying that me, myself, is good enough on my own to do this, and that actually I'm going to build a brand around that. But it was also about stepping into a space with just faith that what I have in my hands is enough for me to do something with. Reverend Victoria Safford talks about this. She says, it's about coming to a place where you realize that your small work has a place in the big work of the world. And I just, when I read that, I was like, this is me taking my small work into the big work of the world. She talks about arriving at a place where you have a glimpse of how the world could be if you contributed your work to it. And she says, as you stand at the gate between your history and your hope, you can never turn back once you've had that experience. That first time moderating experience was me assuming my position at the gate where my history met my hope. I was never able to go back and assume that I could work full time doing something else, and then when I have time, moderate conversations. My small work in the big work is moderating consequential conversations that shape the societies that we dream about, that we pine for, that we talk about, that we designed for. That is my work in the world, and that's where I'm going to stand.
Oh, you know, it sounds like a gift from God. That thing where you just know, you know.
Yeah.
It always. A lot of people say your passion is something that you feel like you're not working when you're doing it, but
Exactly.
when you're not doing it, it feels like a part of you is missing.
Yeah.
Those are the conversations I like listening to, because a lot of the times, had you stayed at CNBC Africa, there'd always be that part of you that's not fulfilled.
A yearning.
A yearning. And then there's also that other part of you where you're not really honing your gift and nurturing it to the way that you need to, and you wouldn't be the conversation strategist right now if you were gigging it.
Exactly. And I always say, you know, people come to me and like, oh, please help me. What's the strategy to find your purpose? And I said, let's stop right there. Where are you finding it? Because it doesn't exist outside of you. And I think part of the challenge is that we use our profession and our purpose interchangeably. It's not about what you do. It's about what you give. And when you're giving of a thing that brings you joy, a thing that is rooted in your love for it and for you and how you do it, and how it makes other people feel and how it moves other people, it's not something that sits outside of you. And so I always think that what a gift to be able to look inward and find something worth giving to the world, and not worth finding and, you know, importing into you. I think what God has done for all of us is seeded the purpose inside of us. And what we need to do is the courage to almost dull the noise from the outside and listen to what's already inside and try and figure out what is the pathway of taking that which I'm already born with, that which is already in my hands, that which is already in my DNA, and sharing that with the world.
And you know, we always know.
Exactly.
We always know. You don't have to look for the gift.
Yeah.
You don't have to, we just always know. And I think one thing that will stay with me is that you're not going to gig your gift or gig your passion, because a lot of the times we are afraid to go all in.
Yeah.
We are afraid to go all in, and we are afraid to commit to the things that we know we are called for. And I wonder, like you said something so beautiful about your gift specifically, and around how these conversations that you are moderating and facilitating have real consequences in shaping the world that we want to see.
Yeah.
What was that one conversation that sticks with you, or that one memorable conversation where you knew that I'm part of something bigger than myself?
You know, funnily enough, I get that question a lot, and you would think that it's like the big stages, like, oh, it was when I was with Bill Gates, or no, it was when I was interviewing President Kagame, or it is none of those conversations. The conversation that has moved me over and over again and reminded me why I do what I do. I got a call from my former high school. So I went to Pietermaritzburg Girls High. I was the first black deputy head, first black girl in leadership at that school. And there was a new leadership at the school, and I was told, Nozi, we are ready to confront institutionalized racism within our school. Can you help us start to have the conversation? And we began to do a work that took us a few years to get to completion, but to infuse a sense of how do you have courageous conversations as young people within the school context while you're trying to find yourself. How are you also trying to connect with others and meeting them where they're at? And how do you raise the hurts that you probably carry from the conversations with your parents, because they lived through those hurts, and the world that you live in now is carrying the legacy of those hurts. And how do you have those with your white friends who don't have the same experience, but you like them because they're your friends, and you play hockey together and you swim together and you do all of those things? I think about what I believe is a legacy we left there doing that work, helping the school to start up a range of courageous conversation clubs. We got it right in one school, and then we began to transplant it into different schools in the region. And then we took it nationally and started working with other schools in the country. I am proud of that work, because that is for me evidence. Oh, getting emotional. That is for me evidence of what happens when you have the courage to take a conversation and to pair it up with the kind of world that you're trying to create. And you give people, and you acknowledge their voice, and you give them the tools to bring their voice into the space, to find each other, to begin to ask new questions, to have breakthrough conversations that don't live and die in the atmosphere, but live in behavioral change. So everybody leaves the conversation moved to be different, not to do different, to be different. Because when we be different, that is what translates into doing different. Identity comes first before the things. Who you are determines what you do, not what you do determines who you are. I'm always reminded of this when I don't want to wake up to go and run. And I'm like, firstly, a real runner, before they start thinking about, oh, I must go do a 10K today, they go, I'm a runner. Identity first. And therefore I run. And this is what gets them up. So those are the conversations that have moved me. The ones where I can see the impact of the behavioral change that has come out of the conversation that we've had.
And the empowerment allows those people as well to pay it forward. So the legacy is not only what you've planted, is how they continue to plant even in your absence.
We were so intentional about not being fly in and fly out consultants and really like seeding the skills and the know-how in the environment. And for me, that's always really been my approach to the work that I do, because I think the more you give, the more you receive. I have a lot of people ask me, because like, oh, Nozi, we see you doing conversation strategy workshops. Why are you building your own competition? Right? You're like just giving people skills, telling them your secrets that have allowed you to get the kind of clients you have, to be on global stages. Like, why are you doing that? Because I'm like, there are so many conversations we need to have. We need, firstly, conversation to be mainstreamed as a leadership tool, a change tool, and it cannot be that I can sit here and just be so excited that I'm the first or the only.
Yeah.
That's just. I think that kind of thinking and mindset, I think the train has long left the station for that kind of thing. And so for me, it's always been about, if I know something, I'm going to share it and I'm going to spread it. And the more I've done that, I have found that I receive so much more in return.
And it's lifting others as we rise, because, you know, being a single story doesn't really help us a lot. It really doesn't, because what I'm thinking about is a lot of the times, especially on the stages, the big stages, people think there's so many people who are voiceless and they look to you to be the voice for them, right? How do you also just strike the balance in lifting them as you rise, giving them a seat at the table? Because people are saying, what about your job?
Yeah.
Gatekeeping doesn't really help the legacy, because what's the use of you building something that won't carry on even without you? But how do you also find the balance between understanding or teaching, I guess, that you're not voiceless, and I'm not going to prescribe the voice for you.
Yeah.
But here are the tools that I can give you to understand that your voice matters in the big world. You know, the small work that you want to give, or the gifts that you have, the magic that you have matters in the big world and can make the impact that we need.
So I always say, especially when I'm coaching at a leadership level, storytelling is fantastic, right? But you know what's actually even more powerful? Story listening. How do you use your seat, your power, your position to listen into the stories of other people? And I think it's just one of the ways in which we can be so much more intentional about not prescribing voice, but creating space for voice. And so I always say to leaders, before you lead with your dusty street story, because we all have, when I grew up in the dusty street, pause. Create the space for other people's stories to be heard. You have the convening power. Even if it is about moderating a panel, before you open up with your own, this is me and this is why don't you open up with somebody else's story, or create the space for somebody else to lead with their story? Even if you're leading a team, it's as simple as, before you share your worldview and your world experience, take the intentional decision to speak last and create the space for other people's stories to be crowded in. It's one of the things I take religiously, because I think we can, I'm going to have to use careful language here. We can get drunk on our own stories.
Yes.
And the more you tell it, the sexier it gets, the more, emotive it gets, the more inspirational it gets. And before you know it, it begins to snuff out the space of other people's voices, because it's all about you and your story. And we are in a privileged position to story listen and story reveal, so that other people's voices might be heard and affirmed, just because you were there in the room and you created the space for that.
Story listening.
Yeah.
You know, I've never heard of that before, because sometimes when you think storytelling, as you said, we get drunk off of telling our own stories. But story listening almost needs us to remove ourselves from it being about us to what is the bigger picture.
But it also forces us to acknowledge our privilege. Sometimes you find I had to go through this mental shift where, growing up poor, you even forget you're not poor anymore. You're still behaving poor in a lot. And to actually realize, no, you're one of the privileged ones now. And so what story listening forces us to do is to confront your privilege and then use it for the benefit of other people, instead of sitting in your privilege and basking in your privilege and your access and your opportunity. It's to say, if Nozi is in the room, you can best believe that we're going to learn something new about somebody else. That's what I want people to think about. Not because Nozi is in the room, we're going to hear Nozi's story over and over and over again. Like, no more dusty street stories. Like, we're good now.
So, actually, about Nozi's story.
Yeah.
Tell us about your book. And I have to say, listening to you right now, I'm just like, where can I get it? I just need to read it now, because we spoke about a lot of things. I think you let or leave room for our stories so much that you didn't even tell me about that story. So please share that.
Oh, gosh, yeah, I wrote a book, so that's the first thing. I'm getting used to saying that. I'm so excited. I think by the time this conversation is being shared, the book might be in stores already. It's called After the Fires. And that's because I went through a very traumatic experience that marks the difference between me being alive and me not being alive. And it was experience of being petrol bombed in a house with my parents. And so this is about the life that happened after the fires. And the biggest thing for me was sharing my journey and my public and private struggle with control. And without giving it too much away, I'll say this. The book is about confronting that the thing that has kept me alive, the thing that has led me to be here, that is perhaps solely responsible for my existence, has been control. And being in control, managing risks, never letting the balls drop, and then being confronted by the realization that that very thing is also the thing that's standing in my way. It's the thing that is now keeping me standing still. And that unless I learn in which moments control serves me and which moments it is a complete disservice to me, this is probably going to be as far as I get. And the book is about that transition. And it's an emotional transition. I don't know why I'm so emotional today. It's an emotional transition.
It's because you're mindful Mondays.
It's an emotional transition. It's a cognitive transition. And this is, I hope, a gift that I share with others, and that I get to share with others who might be on the same journey, who might be needing permission and a pathway to what does it actually look like to just lose control in the most positive way possible. And what stands on the other side of that when you figure out how to just let go and let the thing that's led you to surviving not be the thing that keeps you from thriving.
I love that, because I've been exploring the themes of survival versus the thriving mentality.
Yeah.
And all of it comes with how much we allow of it, because we are all in control. And I'm so excited to read this book, because I can only imagine what it feels like for someone who's just led with their professional lives and kept their private, at bay, what that feels like to actually, especially with writing, it's such a vulnerable experience.
It's scary.
Very scary.
As you would know.
Very scary. People just ask you, when is the next book? But I think the beauty of then hearing your story is that it's on your own terms. You've allowed so many stories. You've got so many stories in you that you could tell. But finally, we get to hear yours. And I'm so excited for it. And I think just as a way to close off, I'm curious, two things. What has anchored you to get to a point where you feel like I can now finally share my story and led you to this point? And after you share that, I want you to affirm yourself in this moment and say, I am Nozipho and I am.
This is so scary. So, I don't really know if there's a simple answer for what has affirmed me to finally tell my story. I think a large part of it has been the people that I've surrounded myself with, because I've always said, I don't have a story to tell. And I remember, and I'll take you to a moment at our dinner table with my husband. We'd had people over and we were having dinner, and my husband goes, tell them your story. What story? He's like, no, tell them your story. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? What story? And he just looked at me and he's like, Noz, and I remember we went to bed that day and he's like, are you seriously telling me that you don't think there's a story in you to tell? And I remember reflecting on that, thinking, my work has been about taking my story aside to be a conduit for the stories of other people. That's what my work in the world is about. I removed myself from the equation, and I'd done it so much that I started to believe that I didn't have anything to say. And so this book is about a massive push from my closest and dearest, who just like, hey, this thing of yours does not make sense. And to be quite honest, when I started writing, the book I set out to write didn't come out. And what came out was the book that was waiting for me. One of my favorite poets, I know we're closing, I'm going to sneak this in.
No.
One of my favorite poets, his name is David White, and he's got a poem called Sometimes. And in that poem, he talks about sometimes moments. And he says it's those moments when something that feels like it's been patiently waiting for you says, I'm here. Now you've got to answer me. And he says it's the question that has no right to go away. And so I just eventually came to my sometimes moment. I came to a place where the question that had no right to go away had been patiently waiting for me, and I was now ready to answer it. And so to affirm myself, I am an author.
That's it.
I am an author. But I like to say one of the things that grounds me is clarity about whose I am. I'm God's child. I am Rory's wife. I am Dilo's mom. I am my team's leader. I'm a girl's girl.
Yeah.
I'm a big sister.
Yes.
And now I can finally say I'm an author.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Tears.
And tears, but all because you're being celebrated today.
Thank you.
I know celebrating yourself sometimes can feel uncomfortable. I know we all go through those moments, but this conversation, I think, has been a celebration and a thank goodness for all those conversations you had with yourself and all those conversations your mom had with you.
Yeah.
We don't thank them enough. You did that. And with this book, I'm so excited, and I hope everyone reads it, because we all get to a place where there's so much that is within our control and we are not aware. There's so many stories we have to tell, but sometimes how we tell them is not how we're supposed to be telling them.
Yeah.
So timing as well. It's a story of timing as well. But thank you for this conversation, because it's also about the power of conversation.
Yeah.
The conversations you have with yourself, the conversations you have with others, the conversations you have with your environment, what you choose to allow and choose to not allow, what you choose to hold you back and what you choose to not hold you back. Obviously, we started in a very controversial way, but I hope you get the lesson in how you choose what you allow in your life, and you choose how you label yourself too. I'm so happy we had the conversation strategist. I like calling you that because I think that's such a brilliant name. And thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh, what an absolute privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you.